Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was humiliated in front of everyone and yet chose to remain silent, knowing that the truth would speak for itself? In a corporate world where appearances matter more than character, this story begins precisely at the moment when arrogance tries to dictate who deserves to be in a certain place. Imagine a luxurious meeting room, glass walls, tables gleaming under cold lighting, and dozens of executives gathered for a multi-million-dollar negotiation. The atmosphere is heavy, every word is calculated, every look carries expectation. And in the center of this sophisticated environment, a black woman, silent, observant, about to face one of the greatest humiliations of her life. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever been in a space where your presence was questioned, even when you had every right to be there? That's exactly what happened when a billionaire, known for his explosive temper and absolute certainty that money gave him power over everyone, pointed at her and ordered her to leave the room. He didn't even ask her name. He didn't even want to know why she was there. He simply assumed that because she was a woman, because she was black, because she was discreetly sitting in a corner, she was just another employee, someone unimportant in the great corporate machine he believed he controlled. This meeting isn't for ordinary employees. Please leave. The silence that filled the room was almost deafening. Executives in tailored suits lowered their gaze, some uncomfortable, others afraid of contradicting such a powerful man. The woman, however, didn't say a word. She only slowly raised her eyes, as if gathering inner strength not to react impulsively. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because even in the face of humiliation, there was something in her eyes, a firm, almost serene gleam that revealed that this story wouldn't end that way. As the billionaire continued speaking, ignoring her presence as if she were invisible, that same gaze remained fixed, deep, laden with truths that no one in that room imagined. And this is where you need to pay attention. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this scene reveals something greater about prejudice, power, and poetic justice. The tension could be felt building, as if everyone knew something was about to happen, but they lacked the courage to interrupt that abusive behavior. The woman took a deep breath, but remained motionless, and at that exact moment, it was enough to observe the billionaire's face to understand. He truly believed he was in control. He believed that order would be obeyed without question. But what nobody knew, and what you're about to understand, is that he was making a monumental mistake. A mistake that would change the course of the conversation, the business, and everyone's perception of who was really in charge at that company. Every passing second amplified the feeling that this humiliation concealed a powerful twist, one that leaves a mark on the soul. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated until the truth came out? Well, that's exactly the kind of silent justice that's about to happen. And while the billionaire continued speaking, unaware of the magnitude of what he was about to discover, the woman remained there, steadfast, present, waiting for the right moment. A calm force amidst the chaos, an authority hidden behind discretion. And it is precisely here, in this moment suspended in the air, that our story deepens. Because what follows is not just an answer, it's a turning point. A revelation capable of transforming the entire meeting room. Let's continue. As the tension in that room continued to rise, something curious was happening among the people observing the scene. There was indignation, discomfort, expectation, feelings that perhaps you yourself have experienced in unjust situations. And if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far, because stories like this gain even more strength when we find other voices that have also felt the weight of prejudice, arrogance, or silent injustice. Your perspective, your experience, can help others realize they are not alone, and this creates a powerful current within this community we are building together. And while I'm telling this story, I need to tell you something in all sincerity. When you like this video and subscribe to the channel, you're not just pressing a button. You're saying that this kind of storytelling matters. You're showing that stories of overcoming adversity, poetic justice, and real-life twists deserve to be told and shared. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, especially those who need to hear that their value goes far beyond appearances. So, if this message touched you in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe. This really helps keep this conversation alive and allows me to continue bringing stories that move us deeply. And while all this goes through the minds of those watching and those experiencing the scene, the woman remains there, motionless, maintaining a posture that seems to silently defy every word of the billionaire. A serene force, almost invisible to those who cannot see beyond the obvious. And it is precisely at this moment that something changes in the air. A subtle detail, almost imperceptible, but one that announces that the situation is about to take a completely different turn. The atmosphere is filled with a strange energy, as if everyone senses that this story is not just about an unjust order, but about the moment when the truth finally emerges. And that's when everything begins to take on a new dimension, because what happens next can transform not only that meeting, but the entire perception of those who thought they had absolute control of the room. Let's continue. The air inside that room seemed denser with each passing second, as if the glass walls held not only the impeccable image of a sophisticated corporate environment, but also all the feelings contained within. The woman remained silent, her gaze firm, and her posture erect, maintaining a dignity that few people managed to perceive at that first moment. But it is here that the hidden truth begins to reveal itself, not to the billionaire, who remained trapped in his own arrogance, but to those who observed this story from behind the scenes, understanding that behind each calm gesture lies an entire journey that no one knows. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. That woman's story didn't begin in that room. It began many years before, in a reality far removed from that luxurious setting. She grew up in a humble neighborhood where many people gave up on their dreams due to lack of opportunity, but she refused to become a statistic. From a young age, she learned to find strength where no one saw light, to make difficult decisions when everything seemed to be working against her. Her journey was marked by exhausting nights of studying, temporary jobs, challenges that tested her mindset and resilience, and an immense desire to transform her own life. There was no glamour, no applause, only effort, and the certainty that each step brought her closer to something greater. While many doubted her, she kept moving forward. She worked for small companies, was underestimated countless times, and heard comments that would make anyone give up, but each injustice became fuel. Each closed door was another reason to prepare herself better. She faced corporate environments where her competence was questioned before she even opened her mouth, and yet she remained steadfast. And it was precisely this combination of quiet strength and strategy that took her much further than anyone imagined. Years later, having accumulated experience, recognized for her analytical intelligence, her ability to lead amidst chaos, and her rare skill in making clear decisions when everyone else seemed lost, she achieved positions that many considered unattainable for someone with her background. And it's surprising to realize how, even at the top, she never lost her humility. She knew her journey was marked by scars, by battles fought in the invisible, by efforts that no one saw. Therefore, she maintained a calm demeanor, like someone who deeply understands the impact of her own choices. The most curious thing is that her presence, even before any title, already commanded respect, not because of her position, but because of her essence. She was the kind of person capable of transforming environments simply by the way she looked and listened. Many were inspired by her without even realizing it. Others feared her, not because of authoritarianism, but because of a strength that didn't need to be announced. But none of that was explicit in that moment. Before the billionaire, he didn't see the leader, the strategist, the president. He only saw the stereotype that his own limited mind had created. He couldn't see the journey that shaped that woman, nor could he imagine that he was in the presence of someone who knew the true value of discipline, courage, and perseverance. To him, she was invisible. To us, the spectators of this story, she is anything but that. It's interesting to note how some people confuse silence with submission, when in reality, silence is often just the interval between a truth and its revelation. The woman was there, letting him drown in his own arrogance, while she remained still, but never passive. It was as if each second was an answer in itself. True authority didn't need to be announced, it simply existed. And perhaps that's what bothers those trapped in the idea of superficial power the most. They don't understand that life is made of journeys, not titles, that the impact we leave on the world stems from our daily choices, not from accumulated wealth. Her mindset was living proof that no momentary humiliation can erase a history built with dignity. And, without even knowing it, the billionaire was about to discover this truth in the most intense way possible. But before that happened, there was an important detail in her posture. Her calm eyes, her concentrated expression, as if she were mentally revisiting everything she had lived through up to that point. Perhaps, remembering the times, they told her she wouldn't amount to much. Perhaps recalling the endless hours of studying, the obstacles that almost brought her down, the opportunities she herself had to create with her own hands. Each memory seemed to further strengthen the serenity with which she faced that moment. She knew who she was, she knew what she represented, and she knew that this type of situation, however painful, did not have the power to diminish her story. And that's precisely why this scene is so striking. Because while the billionaire believed he was in control, she already completely dominated the environment, without raising her voice, without arguing, without proving anything to anyone. True leadership was there, discreet and unbeatable, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that moment was approaching with a force that no one could explain, but everyone could feel. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. While she remained there, steadfast in her meaningful silence, the billionaire seemed increasingly impatient, shifting in his chair like someone accustomed to being served before even asking. There was something in his expression that made it clear that for him, power wasn't just money. It was a kind of license to ignore anyone who wasn't on the same financial level. His eyes scanned the room with the tranquility of someone who believes he commands everything he touches, as if the simple fact of having built an empire were justification enough to treat others as disposable pieces. And it is precisely at this point that the story reveals its deepest face, the arrogance that is born not from security, but from blindness. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about arrogance, we're not just talking about behavior, we're talking about mindset. The billionaire had convinced himself that all his success was solely the result of his own talent, completely forgetting the people who, throughout his journey, supported each of his decisions. Behind the scenes, this type of mindset is dangerous because it creates a hidden truth in the mind of the person who harbors it. The false idea that human value can be measured in numbers, and the more he clung to this belief, the further he became from the reality that was about to crumble before his eyes. What made it all the more symbolic was the contrast within that room. On one side, him, with his impeccable suit, expensive watch, and a posture that almost screamed superiority. On the other, her, discreet, elegant without exaggeration, possessing a presence that didn't need artificial brilliance to assert itself. True authority lay with her, even though he was unable to see it. And perhaps that is one of the most striking ironies of this story. The more financial power he accumulated, the less sensitivity he developed to perceive the essence of the people around him. The billionaire had become a prisoner of his own image. He was admired, feared, and flattered wherever he went. And this fueled a sense of absolute control. He believed his fortune bought respect, loyalty, and even truth. The problem is that real life doesn't work that way. There are things that money simply can't buy: character, vision, empathy. And no matter how much he tried to impose his dominance through intimidation, he couldn't see that at that moment he was becoming small in the face of someone who possessed something that no amount of wealth could buy: dignity. You could almost hear his heavy breathing as he stared impatiently at the woman, waiting for her to back down, to accept his order without question. He didn't imagine, not for a second, that he was about to confront the person who truly held control of that desk. To him, that woman was just another unimportant employee, someone who had happened to stumble into his territory. This automatic disdain said far more about him than any rehearsed speech on entrepreneurship and leadership. And here's an important point. People like him confuse authority with imposition. They believe that leadership is synonymous with superiority, but true leadership, the kind that transforms, that generates real impact, is built with awareness, respect, and vision. The woman before him was the living embodiment of this type of leadership, while he was the embodiment of inflated authority, sustained by figures, but devoid of humanity. The atmosphere in the room was beginning to change, and not because of any gesture of hers. It was his own behavior that was creating tension. Every phrase spoken with disdain, every judgmental look, every calculated gesture to demonstrate power revealed an insecurity hidden in the shadows of his ego. He was so used to living surrounded by people who agreed with everything he said that he didn't even consider the possibility that there might be someone there who wouldn't bow to his presence. And perhaps that's what hurts those with this kind of arrogant mentality the most. The shock of reality. The frustration of realizing that the world doesn't revolve around one's own ego. But at that moment, he still had no idea of that. He firmly believed he was in control, believed the meeting would only continue when his orders were obeyed. He couldn't imagine that that woman, the one he wanted to expel from the room, was precisely the one who had the power to decide his future within that company. And while he remained trapped in his own arrogance, the woman continued exactly as before, firm, silent, observing. There was no resentment in her eyes, only a dangerous calm, the kind that signals that whoever truly controls the situation doesn't need to get worked up. It was as if she were waiting for the right moment to act, aware that each second increased the force of the revelation that was about to happen. This kind of contrast is what makes this story so powerful. The transformation wasn't just in the twist that was to come, but in the clash between two completely opposite mindsets. His built on status and appearance, hers shaped by essence and journey. While he believed that wealth buys everything, she knew that true respect is born from actions, not numbers. And this distinction is what defines who truly possesses power. The billionaire, however, remained blind. He didn't notice the glances exchanged between the executives. He didn't notice the growing unease. He didn't realize he was one step away from destroying his own credibility in the eyes of the people who, until then, had admired him. He was so busy trying to belittle someone he considered inferior that he didn't realize he was diminishing himself in the eyes of everyone. With each sharp word he uttered, the tension increased. Some executives avoided looking directly at him. Others observed the woman with silent respect. There was a curious energy circulating in the room, a mixture of discomfort, expectation, and something very close to hidden admiration. Because even without saying anything, she remained unwavering, and this posture deeply disturbed someone who had always needed the submission of others to feel great. It was obvious he wasn't prepared for what was coming. He wasn't prepared to face a truth beyond his control. He wasn't prepared to understand that power isn't imposed, it's built. And when that revelation finally emerged before him, it would be impossible to ignore the impact. Nothing in his life would be seen the same way after that. But that moment was still forming, growing like a silent wave about to break. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." The instant she took a deep breath and stepped forward, something in the room's atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a brusque gesture, not an aggressive movement. It was the serenity of someone who knows exactly the weight of her own presence. The executives fell silent immediately, as if they sensed that this moment carried something different, something that escaped the eyes of those who only see the surface. The impatient billionaire raised an eyebrow, ready to repeat the absurd order that she should leave the meeting, but she didn't move. She simply held his gaze with that firm calm that dismantles any attempt at intimidation. And then, in a low voice, yet full of authority, she said what no one expected to hear. "Before proceeding, I think it's important to clarify who I am." The room seemed to hold its breath. Those words arrived like a silent yet devastating impact. The billionaire tilted his head, slightly confused, trying to understand what was happening. The executives exchanged quick glances, some suppressing a discreet smile, others anxious to see if he would finally grasp the truth that had been hanging there for so long. The woman maintained her composure, without raising her voice, without defending herself, without justifying herself, because she didn't need to. She simply added, "I am the president of this company," and his world, in that second, began to crumble. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happens in this type of situation isn't just a clash between hierarchical positions, it's a clash between mindsets, between superficial perception and the hidden truth that guides the journey of those who truly understand the essence of leadership. The billionaire's face lost all color. The arrogance that had previously spread through his gestures retreated almost pathetically. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. It was as if he had been ripped from the invisible pedestal on which he had placed himself and was now fully exposed to his own mistakes. And the impact of this wasn't just embarrassment, but the brutal revelation that his limited vision had created a situation from which he could never emerge unscathed. The executives remained silent. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was a silence of respect. It was confirmation that everyone there knew who she was, everyone except him. And this ignorance wasn't accidental, but a product of his mindset. The belief that it's not worth looking into the eyes of someone who doesn't seem important. He had never asked, never shown interest, never realized that while talking about numbers and investments, he was humiliating the very person who commanded all of that with firmness and competence. And this irony hurt more than any open reprimand. The woman walked to the head of the table, naturally resuming her usual place. There was no anger in her movements, only a class that made clear her absolute command of the situation. She sat down, crossed her hands on the table, and looked at everyone with the confidence of someone who knows her worth cannot be diminished by any distorted opinion. Then she turned her gaze to the billionaire and said, with a firm gentleness that cut deeper than any shout, "Now we can continue the meeting." These words, simple and direct, carried an impressive force. There was no aggression, no explicit revenge. It was reverse. Humiliation happening in the most elegant way possible, based on truth. The billionaire swallowed hard, trying to compose himself, but every gesture betrayed his inner turmoil. He adjusted his suit, ran a hand through his hair, forced a forced smile, all tricks of someone trying to hide their imbalance. But there was no way to disguise it. The power he had once displayed like a shield now felt like an uncomfortable weight. He looked around, seeking support, but found only neutral expressions, some even weary. It was clear that everyone there had been waiting for this moment. He was alone in his own illusion of superiority. The woman, on the other hand, didn't seem the least bit shaken. Her posture conveyed mastery, focus, and the confidence of someone who had journeyed through an entire period with effort, intelligence, and difficult decisions. She resumed the agenda items as if nothing had happened, but at the same time she made it clear, without saying a single direct word, that her previous silence had been a choice, a strategic pause, a way to allow him to reveal the extent of his own blindness. It was as if she were guiding not only the meeting, but also the transformation of that dynamic, bringing to light the revelations that truly mattered. With each sentence she uttered, the billionaire sank a little deeper into his own conscience. It was impossible not to notice. It wasn't his money that was at stake, it was his image, the identity built over the years based on power, dominance, and influence. Suddenly all of that seemed fragile. The impact of that revelation wasn't just the mistake he made in that moment, but what he had never been able to see throughout his entire career. She represented exactly the kind of leadership he would never achieve as long as he remained trapped in his own arrogance. The executives watched attentively, some taking notes, others discreetly observing the invisible tension that still lingered between the two, and the woman continued to conduct everything with admirable serenity. She didn't raise her voice, didn't boast about her position, didn't rub her authority in his face. This made everything even more intense, because genuine power doesn't need spectacle. It manifests itself in internal control, in clarity, in the wisdom of knowing when to act. And while she detailed each important point of the meeting, he tried to recover some of his lost dignity, but every attempt sounded forced. The truth is that, in that room, only one person was emotionally standing, and it wasn't him. And that's exactly what makes this scene so striking. It wasn't a revenge based on explicit humiliation. It was a silent victory, built with class, mastery, and the strength of a trajectory that never needed external approval. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too." The room remained thick with that mixture of tension and disbelief as he tried, unsuccessfully, to regain his composure. But now, after the revelation that had shattered his mask, came the part where the world began to exact a price for every arrogant word spoken, for every gesture he thought he would get away with. Because there is something almost invisible, yet extremely powerful, that operates behind the scenes of any human journey. The consequence. No one escapes it. And at that moment, in front of everyone, he realized this for the first time in a way that no amount of money could alleviate. The silence that followed wasn't just awkwardness. It was the hidden truth finally finding space to exist. The executives, who had previously observed him as one might watch a self-assured giant, now looked at him as someone who had never understood his own true size. Even the pretentious glint in his luxury watch seemed less important, almost out of place. And she, without raising her voice, without needing to prove anything, simply took a deep breath and reassumed command of the situation with that quiet authority that cannot be bought, only built over years of choices and a strong mindset. From that point on, everything began to change rapidly. The contract he had taken for granted, the one he considered guaranteed even before entering the meeting, began to slip through his fingers like water. Not out of revenge, not out of whim, but because important decisions require mutual respect, and he hadn't even realized that. It was almost poetic to see the impact of his own actions returning to him with the same intensity as the arrogance he had shown her minutes before. Life has these ironies that seem written by an invisible screenwriter. While he tried to argue, justify, and reverse the situation, the subtlety of poetic justice became increasingly evident. She didn't need to say, "See what you've done?" Everything around her was already speaking for her. A report he had previously ignored now seemed urgent. A proposal he had dismissed now sounded necessary, and that simple employee whom he had treated with disdain was now the only person capable of deciding the future of that multi-million-dollar negotiation. This contrast between appearance and essence created a kind of emotional impact impossible to ignore. But what's most interesting is that she didn't take the opportunity to humiliate him in return, and that's perhaps what disconcerted him the most. The absence of explicit revenge made him see, for the first time, the true difference between financial power and moral authority. Money can buy a luxurious office, but it doesn't buy people's trust. It can pay for assistance, but it doesn't earn respect. It can open doors, but it doesn't sustain reputations. And when life decides to expose this fragility, everything crumbles very quickly. She, on the other hand, like someone who deeply understands the weight of her choices, made each decision with elegance. She reaffirmed boundaries without needing to raise her voice. She explained criteria without sounding defensive. She directed the meeting with clarity, showing that true leadership doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, and doesn't try to belittle anyone. True leadership illuminates, even when the other tries to extinguish it. And, as she positioned herself, the environment naturally reorganized itself around her. That's how it is when someone possesses genuine authority. The space recognizes it, people perceive it, and even the silence changes form. The billionaire, in turn, began to feel the weight of it all not as an attack, but as a mirror. The kind of mirror that doesn't distort, that doesn't favor, that doesn't mask. A raw, honest, inevitable mirror. And perhaps that's what hurts the most. Not the mistake itself, but the moment when we are finally forced to see it. And in that uncomfortable reflection, he saw a man who confused fortune with character, influence with respect, and power with value. A truth that, until then, he had never been forced to face so directly. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because his true transformation didn't begin with the shock of the revelation, but rather with what came after, when he realized he no longer had control over the narrative. The contract was suspended. The board decided to reassess the partnership. Some collaborators who had always flattered him avoided eye contact. His once untouchable reputation began to suffer small scratches that together formed a crack difficult to hide. People whispered in the hallways that perhaps this episode was merely a reflection of old, repetitive, tired behavior. And it was at that point that he finally understood that the humiliation he tried to inflict had come back to him in the only way that truly transforms someone, through conscience, not public shame, but inner understanding. He was forced to admit that he had treated someone with disdain without knowing who they were, and even more so without caring to know. And that, in the real world, exacts a much higher price than any lost negotiation. It demands respect, it demands credibility, it demands the very image he thought was so solid. She, on the other hand, left the meeting carrying with her a quiet truth. That character doesn't need to be announced. It simply reveals itself. The impact of her stance spread throughout the company like a silent lesson, one that doesn't need speeches to teach. Everyone realized that dignity isn't measured by the clothes someone wears, but by how that person acts when no one is watching. And that's the difference that determines who truly builds something lasting. The poetic justice that day wasn't his downfall, but her ascension. An ascension that already existed, but was finally witnessed. And this vision leaves a deep mark on those who witness it. Because it recalls a simple and powerful truth. No one is too small to deserve respect, and no one is too great not to have to offer it. The story doesn't end here, because what happened after this episode reveals something even stronger about decisions, mindset, and human transformation. But before we continue, comment below, does this make sense to me? You know, if you've made it this far, it's because some part of this story spoke directly to you. And I like to think that when a message finds someone in this way, it's not by chance. So before you continue, let me ask you something very simple, very light, almost like continuing a conversation after a long coffee. If this content added something to you, if it made you reflect or see things from a different angle, subscribe to the channel. That way you stay connected, and I can continue bringing stories and reflections that really make a difference on this journey we're building together. And since you made it to the end, Tell me in the comments in just one sentence, so I know you stayed with me until the very last minute. Write, "I'm with you until the end." I'll know exactly what that means. Oh, and of course, leave a like. Not as an automatic gesture, but as part of this connection we've created here, this silent understanding that when something touches us, it's worth recording. Now, if you want to continue along this same line of thought and delve even deeper into what we discussed today, there's a video here that complements this topic in a way you'll understand right away. Click and continue reading there.